Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Nobody Asked Me Guy show. Guys, listen, as always, you know how we do it here on the Nobody Asked Me Guy show. We have very interesting guests, and you guys know that we talk real talk. We're not disrespectful, and we don't talk about individuals. We discuss situations, and we're always asking you to join us in the conversation. So tonight, we're going to have a conversation. Now, our topic is going to cover diversity, inclusion, and equity. And to help us cover that topic is none other than Brother Mike Kasdan. Mike is an intellectual property lawyer at Wiggin and Dana LLP, where he also serves on and is also an adjunct professor at NYU School of Law. Mike is also the director of special projects and senior, where he is involved in developing and rolling out their corporate diversity training, which is focused on allyship, I'll call it that, director and development chair at My Child's Cancer. Most importantly, he is the father of Jacob, who's 18, Lauren, who's at Pennsylvania at New York University School of Law, and currently lives in Minneapolis, New Jersey. Now, this is what here, Mike, I see here, if I'm chopping some of this up, Mike is going to help me because he's going to come and he's going to share more with us. So, guys, we want you to welcome Mr. Mike Kasdan. Mike, good evening, sir.
Hey, Melvin. Good to be here, and thanks for having me on. Nice to see everyone.
Listen, it's our pleasure to have you, Mike. And as always, my audience know how I am, man. They know that we're going to get right to it, and we don't pull any punches. And I just want to ask you, Mike, if you will, if you just share with us a little bit more, because your resume is quite extensive. And I always call bios resumes. However, I always say, people say, well, it's too long to read. But my motto is this, Mike: if we feel that a person is important enough to ask for information, then it should be noted. But I felt very strongly that you would be better served to share with us a little more in depth about what you do and about these great kids that you have, and then we'll move forward and jump all over this diversity, inclusion, and equity.
Sounds good, Melvin. Yeah, so I'm living in Maplewood, New Jersey, just outside of New York City, and like Melvin said, my day job, I'm an intellectual property lawyer. My passion project for the past 7 or 8 years has been the Good Men Project, where I came in writing about sports and mental health, but also write a lot about a host of different issues. And I've been helping them on their diversity programming and training. And I've been getting more involved with that at my law firm. And yeah, I'm here in Maplewood. I have 2 kids. Jacob, who's off to Syracuse next year. We're figuring out what that's going to look like in these coronavirus times, but he's super excited about it. Huge sports fan. And then my daughter Lauren is going to be a junior in high school, and she's fantastic. She plays softball. She loves dogs and animals and thinks she might be a vet someday. So we're going to miss Jacob. We're also excited. So it's an exciting time.
I'm sure they'll miss you too, but as you and I know, as postgraduate individuals, is that it's one thing to leave home, and then once you leave home, and then you realize, like, wow, I didn't have it as bad as I thought. It was pretty cool not having to pay bills and all that kind of stuff. But then when we get to that adult world, sometimes, and then we're responsible for everything. So I'm sure Lauren and Jacob may have some of those days.
Yeah, no, for sure. I know, on parenting, I know we all focus on the parenting of gathering them up close and loving them up, but part of parenting is also the pushing them off and letting them go do their own thing. And so, yeah, 2 sides.
Absolutely, absolutely. So listen, let me do one last thing, Mike. I want to share with our audience, our new audience, that we do FaceTime at the bottom. Feel free. You want to FaceTime Mike and ask him any questions specifically, feel free to grab one of those cameras and come on and ask Mike or myself anything you'd like to ask us. And then once you've done that, if you'll be so kind as to relinquish the cameras so that others may ask questions. Or if you're bashful and you don't want to FaceTime us, then put your questions in the box, as you can see on your computer, if you're inside the room. Now, if you're on other monitors like we are here, sometimes we can see questions, sometimes we can't. So if we're ignoring a question, then please forgive us, but sometimes we can't see them as we move forward. So, Mike, proceeding forward, if we might, can we do some dissection of the word diversity? Well, actually, we have three words that we're talking about, concentrating on tonight. We're talking about concentrating on diversity, inclusion, and equity. Now, sadly, there are many people that try to lump these words in together and to give them one meaning because, quite honestly, it's easier for some people. Will you please, sir, kind of break these down for us as we start with diversity, as you see it as a diversity trainer and the training that you've had and maybe the experiences that you've had in your life? And then and once we do that one, then we'll move on to inclusion.
Sure.
And then once we do inclusion, we'll move on to equity.
Sure. I mean, I'm happy to give you my perspective. I am by no means an expert. I'm a sort of continuous student, but it's something that I have been trying to focus on and learn from and be involved in, both at my law firm and also at the Goodman Project. And, and I think diversity is almost like the easiest, right? Diversity has the meaning that I think we all kind of think about, in the dictionary, right? Making sure that we're diverse, and you can have lots of different types of diversities, right? In the workplace, we talk about having diversity of opinions and viewpoints and backgrounds. Also diversity between, men and women, right? Do we have women in leadership positions? We talk about, racial diversity. We talk about diversity, having bisexual orientation. So diversity looks at, if, for example, and I work at Wiggin and Dana, Connecticut law firm, long history, founded across the street from Yale, right? If you went back, 50 years, 60 years, and you look at the pictures, and we still have some of these pictures, right? It's a bunch of like kind of old white guys, not very diverse. If you look at our current makeup, we're getting better. So diversity is making sure that we have a diversity that we have, and I can't really define the word with the word, but making sure that you have people of different backgrounds, of different colors, of different nationalities, of different sexual orientations, different, men and women. And I think that strengthens an organization. If you want to look at it from a business perspective, that has a lot of benefits, and those studies are out there. But just from a human perspective, that's our world, and we should be reflecting that in our day-to-day, whether we're at work or not. So that's diversity. You also mentioned inclusion, and this is,
yes,
that's not a word that I was really familiar with going back, 7 years ago, and I think that was that's almost like the most, well, it's very important because inclusion really looks at culture, right? Diversity is a first step, right? And but if it ends with just like a box checking exercise where we look at our numbers and we say, okay, well, we have 50% men and we have 50% women among our partnership, and we have this percentage of Black people, and we have this percentage of Hispanics. Yes, we're diverse, but if you haven't created an inclusive environment, if you haven't created a culture where all these people from different backgrounds have power and have say and are comfortable there and feel like they're part of something, then you're not going to have diversity for very long because they're going to leave. So inclusion is a much bigger, almost tougher thing to do, from my perspective.
That word is a huge word in and of itself to a lot of people. Because why do I say that? It has been my experience that when individuals start pressing the conversation about equity, individuals start pressing the expectation, I should say shuns of equity, when individuals start pressing the idea of actually receiving equity, it seems to start to muddy the water for a lot of people. Now, from your expertise and your rendition and understanding of equity, what would you share with us, in your opinion, as a diversity trainer? Equity, the use of equity. Maybe I'm looking for an answer to a question that there is no answer to, but I'm really trying to ask the question: and I have it written down, but I don't want to ask that. So, but as we talk about equity, maybe I'll rephrase it in that manner, if you will allow me. What do you see in your professional life and in your personal life and in things that you've seen through the news media, etc., that causes so much consternation? Maybe that's what I'm looking for. When equity is brought up among individuals that have not had to be concerned with whether or not they were being treated equally or they were getting equitable return on investments or life or anything of that nature.
Yeah, I think it's a great question and a tough one. And like you said, maybe not one I can easily answer. But equity, and you just use that word a couple of different ways, right? We talk about equity, right? When you talk about equity, how much ownership do you have? How much stake do you have? But you also talk about equity in the way people talk about equality, right? Am I getting opportunity? Am I getting the equal opportunity? And what needs to be put in place for me to get that opportunity? And I think, at least what I've seen, in terms of, you asked what gives people consternation, why this is such a difficult thing, and I think, and again, I'm not going to come off as like I'm going to dictate because I'm the expert. I'm a white person who, frankly, lived a sheltered life for most of my life, and I would benefit from sitting and listening to a lot of people who aren't me talk about their experiences in equity. But from where I sit, since you asked me, my perspective is that people don't like to think about built-in advantages that they have. And a lot of people don't have to think about that. A lot of people. So, if I went, I had a lot of privileges growing up, right? I came from an upper middle class white family. Both my parents went to college. Both my parents were in my house. They sent me to a good college. Now I did well, right? I went to a good college. I went to a good law school, and I like to think of myself as, well, hey, there I am. I'm doing all that stuff. I deserve, to move up. I deserve a good job. I deserve a lot of money. I deserve, and but when you really stop and think about it, of course, a lot of my success came because of those privileges. But a lot of people don't like to think about that because I think there's this like reflexive human thing where it makes them feel like maybe they're less, or someone saying, oh, well, everything you got, you don't deserve. And I don't really think that's it at all, but I think a lot of people have that defensiveness, that reflexiveness. Some people have written about, white fragility. And people, that's why it's a difficult topic to address. And it's a difficult topic to address because what do we have to do to correct these systematic, institutionalized, inequities, right? And then you talk about things like affirmative action and should we be taking more people to be diverse? And then you have a class of people who get upset and say, oh, well, what about me? Why don't we just take the best people? And they're not realizing that it's a big pie. It's not like they're the only best people. There are lots of people who are deserving, but don't have those opportunities. And I think when you start pushing for equality of opportunity, you hit up against these issues, these kind of biases, the fact that people get really defensive about privileges, and I think that makes it hard. And look, if these institutionalized like isms, and I think they're all kind of connected. I think racism is the biggest one we're confronting, but from my perspective, anti-Semitism, misogyny, all those things, they're all kind of connected, and they perpetuate because people don't want to address them, because it's so hard to address them, because there's so much momentum towards this sort of dominant class just keeping on pushing on. And so, that's kind of my take on it. That's why it's hard. But to me, that's what I'm hopeful we have to kind of push through and have these difficult conversations and address that stuff out in the open.
Mike, that's excellent. As we talk about these things, diversity, inclusion, equity, and then of course we break it down and talk about fairness and what's not fair, and who should have done what, and etc. When we talk about having a conversation and listening, it would serve us all well to listen to others. I mean, obviously, we've not all had the same experiences in our existences, and many times, as you're sharing with us, we refuse to do that. Which brings us to this little word, gaslighting. Now, I know that articles have been written all over the place, and even in the Goodman Project about gaslighting and that kind of thing. And in layman's terms, what would that mean to the average guy who does not have privilege, let's say, because, let's say, having parents that were well educated, because having parents that were able to afford to send them to universities and that kind of thing, and actually by no fault of their own. And this is a loaded question, Mike. Let me warn you, by no fault of their own. However, there are stories out there of people that have come from impossible situations, and yet they've been able to overcome. So, how do we address the gaslighting when it is intended, quite frankly, to, if I can, let me use the word cover up, or to be disingenuous in our delivery when we're talking to people in those particular vernaculars that I've explained? People that have come from absolutely nothing, where the odds were supposed to be utterly impossible, and they, quote, have arrived, as opposed to individuals that should not feel ashamed and should not be embarrassed, is because, hey, my parents were educated, they afforded me certain opportunities. Why should I apologize?
Yeah.
So,
No,
yeah.
No, I get what you're saying, and I just want to say before I jump in is, these stories and these conversations, and it sounds kind of like if you go to diversity training, we'll say all these words, and we'll talk about safe spaces, and we'll talk about listening, and I think it's easy to kind of shrug off, and that's why I thought real stories and connecting to people and talking is the way to change. And I think you ask a great question. I don't think as a country we're very good at dealing with gaslighting. I think we have a president who's really, used it in a devastating way. But I think that your question about, well, what about people saying, well, look, they overcame odds and they succeeded, and so everything's fine. And I think that really misses the point, right? It's so if a small percentage of very, very extraordinary, very, very lucky people can succeed, it doesn't mean that our system is working, because you have to look at all those other people, right, who are just as smart and capable as me and might have a very valuable viewpoint and opinion, who don't get the opportunity to speak, right? So just because you can say, well, look, like LeBron James, he's black and he's really famous and rich, and so we're fine. But how many thousands and thousands of others who are not as gifted as he, are not succeeding and falling between the cracks. And look, I look at things. I think you can look at these things kind of two ways, right? You can, and I don't care which way you look at it. You can look at it from a business perspective, and I can tell you why it's better to be diverse and why it's better to have different opinions. Or you can look at it from this is just right and makes us stronger. But I'll give you an example. I'm an intellectual property lawyer. I deal with patents, right? If you look at the history of our country, if you look at all the inventors in patents, right? It's a massively huge percentage of them are men and are white. And that's because our system is set up in a certain way. Imagine the innovation and inventiveness if we had even close to as many women and people of color going, being able to compete in that field. The fact that that we have that we don't have diversity there, it hurts us hugely. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I kind of meandered around, but I tried.
Actually, you did, and we
Okay.
And we would like to welcome Miss Andrea Reynolds. As a matter of fact, Andrea is an engineer, and she's
Okay.
she's very near and dear to this old man right here. and I'll say that nationally. And also, I want to invite Larry. Feel free if you want to grab one of those cameras and join our conversation. Feel free to jump in. But and we want to share it with you as well, Andre. You want to jump in and grab the conversation? Please do. We're talking about diversity, inclusion, and equity, and we're talking about gaslighting and how people do that. But before you jump in, guys, let me share this. See, when you said to me that, Mike, that you hope you answered the question, you answered it excellently. And I love the analogy that you used about athletes, because that is really what people fail to understand. You have all of these ladies and men that participate in athletics, but a very small number actually ascend to what we consider to be the apex.
Yep.
Not many of the people don't work just as hard. They don't train. They don't dedicate themselves. They don't have the proper diet. None of that. Sometimes, whether we admit it or not, is numbers. Sometimes, especially when it comes to physical abilities, some people may just not have that physical ability. Sometimes, because the way the system is set up, he or she may be the better athlete, but the system wants you to be 6'5" and you're only 5'11", but you can do the same thing the 6'5" person does. Mm-hmm. But so when we start talking about things of this nature, man, I'm glad that you went that route, because most people follow sports and they don't think about it in that vernacular, and please allow me to take it one step further before we allow our guests to hop in here, and before you elaborate even more, Mike, is that I would tell people all the time, this is personal, I would tell people all the time is that I hated the analogy student athlete. And if you check the research, I'm going on record tonight to say I was absolutely correct as a teenager 65 years ago, which is an exaggeration. I would tell people all the time, why do you call me a student athlete? Because of all of the dumb jock jokes and all of that stuff. So you're telling me that the two are not supposed to peacefully coexist. I'm not supposed to be cerebral if I'm an athlete, or a really good one at that, or vice versa. And when you do the research, Mike, it'll show you this term came up at a university, I think back in the 1947, 1952, somewhere. An athlete got injured. His parents did not have. They wanted the university team to pay his medical bills. The team did not want to pay his medical bills, so they got the attorney, Mike, to come up with this loophole. And because he was not an employee of the university, they said he's not an employee of the university, he's a student, whereby he's a student athlete, so we do not have to pay his medical bills. That's where that term originated. But it's amazing to me how people just completely ignore that. And they think that I tell people all the time, you really think your son and your daughter is somebody saying something nice to them, but they really are not. If you study the history of this thing, it has nothing to do with their academic prowess. It had to do with somebody not wanting to pay money. So when you share that, please.
We can do a whole different hour-long conversation about sports and the NCAA, but it's a great point, because only now in the past year is some of that beginning to be undone with lawsuits about paying players and whether student athletes can be paid and unionized. But yeah, it's a way to it's a system of control.
Yes. So Andrea, feel free. You have questions, comments you want to jump in and share with us, feel free to jump right in.
So you talking about diversity and inequalities and so forth? That's what you're talking about?
Yes.
A female engineer, and then a Black engineer. I worked in the oil field, and so they made hired on. They made it well known that they did not want me there. One was being a female. That was the number one. To make sure I didn't make it through the schooling and training that they had. And it was interesting how the Americans would not accept those who were internationals coming for the same school that I was going through for my first real job. The foreigners, the internet, kinder and more helpful to me than my own American, you know, I guess, you know, native. I just like, I didn't belong there. You shouldn't be here. And we're not going to help you make it. And so I had to work harder. And I had to stay up there in the 90s, 95s, 100% on all exams and so forth that we had during this time to be able to make it. And so, you know, when I finally got out there into the job, you know, it was a, you know, a reality and stuff, but they tried their best, but you know, they didn't know that they were running into a black female who had 18 years kicked their butt barefoot or was still toe boots. You know, and so I was able to hold my own ground, and then also I wasn't scared of snakes and spiders and bugs, oh my, kind of thing and stuff. So but my first encounter was in college. And then one of the instructors told me, if you don't drop my class, I'm going to fail you. And I had no choice. And I was the only black student out of 3 classes that were combined. And I was the only student in there. 2 instructors, they loved the work that I did. I was an architectural student at one point in time. And my instructor did everything. Lately just told me to drop his class. And so there's a lot of stuff going, there's just, I mean, but why? And now, seeing all the things that are going on, and then so many people being so intolerant of their opinions. You know, what if I do like the color blue? You know, you get beat up by it. What if I like the color red? What if I like the senator? I get beat up by it. If I don't like the president, if I do like the president, if I like the this, I mean, and then you know, some of the you know, quote, celebrities are trying to chime in, trying to, you know, something, or trying to you know, just say something. They get beat up. You know, what person was sharing about what he thought about the flag. He said what the flag meant to him. You know, it meant military and people. And then why does he have to come back and apologize? That was his opinion. That's what the flag stands for. You know, so it's, you know, we're saying that we have freedoms, and just in general, people, and I feel the media is a big, they just need to be all just unplugged. Not allowing us to have freedom of speech anymore. They're not allowing us to be individuals. They're not allowing us freedom of speech anymore. And so it's like one way or no way, and the media is just so biased that they're not all of its opinion. And
yeah, I so agree with you on that.
You're afraid to say anything. You're afraid to speak out. You know, you're gonna get fired if you do this, if you don't do this, if you say something. You know, everything is out to get of your opinion. Now I know some opinions are need to be examined, but just saying, hey, it's freedom and people have died for our country, that's just patriotism and a love of your country, and what we stand for. And so I think, you know, it's taken it to the extreme of allowing to be free to speak, especially when things which is so common and just natural. there's that the wrong is right and right is wrong now. And, damn if you do and damn if you don't. That's just the way things are going now, I feel.
Okay.
I
Mike,
think
please
so much.
respond, Mike. Please respond.
Yeah, no, I think so much of what you said is so powerful, and just talking about your experience as a Black female engineer, and I shared that example about not having a lot of women inventors, not without even knowing you were going to show up. But I mean, it's exactly what you were talking about, and I thought the most powerful thing about what you said before, and then we'll talk about the media stuff too, because I thought that's so important to examine. But you said, but why? And I think that's that's the question, right? Like, who is it serving first of all, to create an environment that doesn't encourage, you to come in and help innovate? No problem. And I think the reason, and I think it connects to the media point that Andrea made. That the reason is that people think about all this stuff as like a zero-sum game. Like, if a woman succeeds, a man loses, or if a Black person succeeds, the white man loses. And I think that perspective is like the single most damaging thing, right? Because it's not true. It's not correct. The reality is that when you have more diversity and inclusion, you create an environment, and taking the innovation example, everyone wins more. But people get so territorial and so afraid that if you get something, they're going to lose something. And I think we're seeing actually the same thing, like you're saying, the news and how everything is so polarized. And, it seems like we used to be, I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I was just too young then to realize, but at least my idealized version of where we used to be was like you'd have people have different opinions, and we everyone would talk about them, and we'd compromise, But now we have kind of a news channel for you to watch if you're conservative, and a news channel to watch if you're liberal. And we have, we thought maybe the internet would make things better because everyone was talking, but instead, I have my Facebook group where I talk to my liberal friends, and conservatives have their Facebook group, or Reddit. They talk to their conservative friends, and everyone's got these separate tribes, and we've really lost the ability to going back to what we were talking about earlier, to like have conversations and listen to each other and come to a resolution, rather than just like, this is right and you're wrong and there's no way we can move. And look, there are certain issues that I feel like there is a right and a wrong, and there's no 50%. And those are really tough issues. But I think, so much about what you said is really resonates. And I think about, I think it's a quote or a story. My girlfriend Lisa Duggan told me. I think it was about Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, right? Famous, dance couple, where he was getting a lot of notoriety and fame, and she's like, "Well, I'm doing everything backwards and in high heels, right? So how much more do you have to do to succeed?" I thought of that when you were speaking. So thanks for coming on and sharing.
We're happy that you're here, Andrea. And again, we want to invite any of our guests that are in the room. If you want to grab a camera, grab a camera. Listen, guys, as we move on further, we are at 33 minutes, and I promised Mike I'd only keep him 30. But Mike, will you allow us to stay just a little bit longer?
Yeah, sure. I'm good.
Okay.
One thing I've got
when
is
we
time.
talk about the diversity piece, when we talk about the diversity piece and inclusion and equity and that kind of thing, as you are addressing those individuals when you are working with them on diversity, can you cite one or maybe two of the biggest obstacles that you encounter when you're trying to get people to open their eyes, maybe, and open their minds a little bit more?
Sure. So I think one I already mentioned, but I'll say it again because I really think it is the biggest obstacle. Some people don't want to. Some of the most important people who you need to be involved in these conversations in order to make change, oftentimes are the people that say, "Oh, that's not my issue. That's someone else's issue." So there's studies, that big famous consulting firms, give that, if you have a diversity and inclusion program, and you don't have white men involved, it oftentimes doesn't succeed, right? And that makes sense. But those are also the same people that when they get the email that says diversity and inclusion, they say, oh yeah, or oftentimes do. So and I think the other issue is kind of that defensiveness. I think when you bring someone in to do a sexual harassment, conversation, and you're going to be talking about Me Too type issues, and a couple guys crack jokes, what they're really doing is saying, I feel uncomfortable. I have a target on my back, and I think learning to sort of navigate being uncomfortable with the fact that these are really important issues to navigate, I think is really important. So I think people aren't used to having these conversations in general in their lives, and also, in the media, we're kind of having separate conversations in our lives. I did a session today with a bunch of folks at my law firm talking about, trying to, talk about racial justice and trying to get people. It was led by our chief diversity officer, and she was asking about, like, how many times across racial lines have you had a conversation, for example, about George Floyd? It wasn't that many times, and there's reasons for that, right? Because people are uncomfortable with that. So I think kind of actually talking about this stuff and moving past that discomfort is really, really important. It's kind of like one of the most important things.
As you share that, allow me to make an analogy. You and I talked about sports earlier before Andrea joined us, before Larry joined us, and maybe they were here. But I've said to people more times than I care to remember, I was very blessed as a coach and as an athlete. National championships, state championships, played ball at every level, etc. And one of the biggest things in our profession, be it Little League, be it high school, it doesn't matter. If you are not winning, they want you out. They don't care about how nice you are, if you're on the PTA, if you bake cookies for everybody, and about a sport.
Mm-hmm.
But then when it comes to human lives, and when it comes to human beings, where our minds somehow get twisted, we start to make excuses for people being treated inhumane, people being mistreated, etc. And to take it another step further, real quickly, even as a teacher, I'm a former principal, man. Most people have seen Joe Clark and Lean on Me. I worked for the great Dr. George McKenna. The Dr. George McKenna movie aired in 1986. Denzel Washington played the part of my boss. I have been blessed to have turned 3 schools around myself. I have my own Joe Clark stories. Why do I bring that point up? When you are not performing educationally, everybody wants your head. They are not anti-education. They just want people out of positions that are not furthering the lives of these children and getting them prepared. But when it comes to issues that you have touched upon, and we talk about media and we talk about liberals and conservatives, etc., but when it comes to issues that people don't want to talk about, then all of a sudden you can hear crickets. And as you mentioned when you were doing the thing today, and you talk about how many conversations about Florida across racial lines, that's where we need to, in my opinion, is where we need to come together and work. Nobody is anti-police. We're anti-murderers. That's what people don't want to talk about. That's why I want to use the teacher analogy, and that's why I want to use the coaching analogy. Nobody is anti-education. Nobody is anti-teacher. They are anti that administrator who is a detriment to the profession. They are anti-teacher who is a detriment to the profession. So they are not anti-education. But when it comes to law enforcement and that kind of thing, then all of a sudden, everybody pretend they don't understand what you're talking about. I have a lot of relatives that I love dearly that are in law enforcement. I have a lot of relatives that are the friends, personal buddies of mine. And we've had these conversations many times. I mean, and I'm serious. We are really close buddies. And that's what we talk about all the time. Matter of fact, we had a heavy conversation about that when it came to Floyd. So as you talk about diversity, and as we move forward, and I listen to Ms. Reynolds talk about being an engineer and not being wanted and that kind of thing. What I'm asking is an unfair question of you. Are there techniques or any other kind of suggestions that we might be able to employ in trying to get people to open their minds up to address the real issues, which are human beings, and not somebody throwing a football or somebody shooting a basketball or somebody hitting a tennis racket, hitting a tennis ball or hitting a golf ball?
Yeah, I mean, I think your analogies are spot on.
I think all of that comes down to money. Who's making who, and that's what I think the sports are all about. That they're getting paid on the backs of other people. So if the athletes were not black, white, whatever, but predominantly black, if they were not bringing the mega bucks, we wouldn't be on the team. They would not be on the teams. So it all comes down to money and we're talking about inequality and so forth. They're not making room for us. I'm a black business owner now, a minority women-owned black woman business owner, and they're not making room for me inventions and innovation to what I'm good at. I'm in the process of a big institutional property and putting their name on it, and nobody will help me because they're saying, oh, this is you can't do that. But these people are stealing my years of hard work and not making room for me as a woman, a minority, small business. They're not making room for me, and they're stealing from me, and nobody would help. So diversity, where is the conclusion? Where is the inclusion for me when I have something that I know they want because there's and so, but there's no help out there for these. And so, they're saying they have money set aside for small businesses, for minority businesses, but they don't make they don't make it easy to climb over and so forth. So you just these small businesses, during the pandemic, they're just drowning out there. Where can you get help? But yet here's the big boys, sneaking and getting $10 million of the stimulus, and they don't even need it. But the little guy, he's still waiting. He didn't have his paperwork properly done or whatever, and he's not in the light of day. So
yeah, well, listen,
they're they say they're making room, but I don't think they really.
Yeah, on the IP front, we should talk offline because that's what I do. I'd be happy to talk to you about it. But look, of course, money, power, right? These are huge things, and that's why I think, bigger picture. If we're talking about change, it has to come. It has to come from the top down and from the bottom up, and the way it comes from the top down, right? The reason that the NFL made a statement, last week, isn't because Roger Goodell became a better human being and said, "Oh, I was wrong," right? It's because there was pressure to do that was created because because what's jeopardized is their ability to make a lot of money because people care about these things, and that's how change has to push forward. It's funny. My son used to say, in the not too recent future, I'd say, "Are you going to that march? Are you going to that action?" "Oh no, marching. Why? I don't understand why people march. Marching doesn't do anything. We just march, and then nobody does anything." And he's not necessarily wrong most of the time, but that kind of rankled me. I was like, "Yes, you have to go out there and speak." He was like, "Yeah, it doesn't do anything. I play video games." But after this last week, I said, look what this marching did. This is doing something. Things are changing. I mean, and look, we've been here before where we thought things are changing and then it doesn't. So there has to be follow through. But I mean, Melvin, you started asking me, this kind of wrap up and, what's the takeaway? How do we change things? And you mentioned education as an analogy, but I think education is always also where it's at. I have a friend who I met through the Good Men Project named Mark Green, who always said to me, well, if you could pick one thing, to teach your kid one subject matter to teach your kid that he would know inside out, what would it be? And it's not like math or engineering. It's actually relationships, right? How to have good relationships. If you know that, you're gonna have a good life. But nobody teaches that. They're just like, you kind of half-ass it, and some parents do a good job and others don't, and you go out there in the world and you do your best. But I think these issues are similar to that. No one's out there teaching, how to have these tough conversations, and we all have to kind of do that together. And it's kind of, for a lot of people, it's new. It's things people haven't thought about before. For a lot of people, it's things that they live every day, and they're saying, well, why the hell haven't you thought about this before? But I think bridging that gap is really important, and I hope that we can continue to do it.
Yeah, so listen, excellent answer. It's a great place to stop because this is a conversation that could go on all night. So listen, Mike.
Should go longer than that.
Hey, brother, listen. Yeah, you're absolutely right, man. Listen, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your expertise with us, man. And listen, we're gonna have to do this again. And I sincerely mean it. We'll have to talk about some more topics and share some more information because it certainly is critical. And I want to encourage Andrea to make sure that she contacts you after we finish this broadcast. But Mike, listen, is there an email or telephone number or anything you'd like to leave in case? And we have tons of listeners, by the way, man. I want to tell you guys before we get off. I mean, the thumbs are going crazy and the hearts are going crazy and all of that. I'm surprised I don't see very many questions, but they are listening. And
yeah, so I'm pretty easy to find on social media, like on Twitter at Michael Kasdan, or you can find me on Facebook or LinkedIn. My personal email is mkasdan, MKASDAN, at gmail.com. So pretty easy. And Andrea, if anyone else wants to reach out, I'd be happy to talk. And Melvin, thank you for doing what you do. And I'd love to come back and talk another time.
Hey, sounds great. Andrea, would you like to leave information if someone wants to contact you and tell them how they can contact you?
I have my email is cmathiseasy@gmail.com. Company is C, the letter C, mathiseasy.com is our website, and then cmathiseasy@gmail. Email.
Okay, great.
The letter C.
Well, listen, guys, it's been great having you here. And as our audience knows, this is the Nobody Asked Me Guys show. I'm your host, Melvin Lars, and we always encourage you to go out and get that latest book, guys, Mothers and Their Men, an introspective look at mothers rearing their sons. It's not a parenting book. It's just about a book that is told from a mother's perspective. We had over 400 people to get back with our surveys, and it's very exciting. We had moms that are what you call on public assistance, all the way to moms with PhDs. Very interesting conversations. We have diverse topics, and at the end, there are questions there that you can have conversations with your mother, with your friends, etc. So go to Barnes & Noble, or you can go to the Nobody Asked Me Guys show at gmail.com and get that book. It's called, again, Mothers and Their Men, an introspective look at mothers rearing their sons. So guys, listen, it's been great, but we want to encourage you to come back Friday. Yes, we have a triple header this week. Come back Friday. Friday at 5 p.m., we're going to have none other than investigator Latienda, what is her name? Pierre Davis. She's an investigator for the Shreveport District Attorney's Office, and she's going to be talking about law enforcement from the inside out. A lot of this, unfortunately, stems from the death of Mr. Floyd, and there are a lot of questions out there. People have a lot of confusion. She's going to be answering questions and talking to you about information that goes there. Then Friday evening at 7 p.m., we're going to have none other than Roland Harper. Roland is an 8-year NFL veteran, played for the Chicago Bears. He's one of the major blockers for Walter Payton. He was the winner of the Brian Piccolo Award. And Roland is going to be here along with Byron Lyons, who is working on his PhD in education. He's a former HR director, and also Mr. Reg Kopicus, who's also a diversity trainer, and he's in Toronto, Canada. So come back and join us, guys, again. We want to thank our guest very much, Mr. Michael Kasdan. You've been great, and we will certainly do this again.
Sounds like a plan.
Have a great night.
Good night, everyone.